VCRs in the 90s, family radios in the 30s, flying cars in the 2070s.
Well, everyone has a flying car.
What do all these items have in common? Well, almost every single house in the country had at least one at the time. And some decades have items so widespread and so particular to the time that they immediately date the house perfectly, with one 10-year period standing out in particular. I'm Nostalgic Nick with Do You Remember? And today we're taking a look at some things found in almost every home in the 1960s.
Different time, the 60s.
If you enjoy our time capsule, please give this video a thumbs up to show support. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a memory. But now let's peel back the layers of time and take a deep dive into the past. Corded rotary phone. Try to explain a rotary phone to a 10-year-old, I dare ya, cause you're about to have one heck of a frustrating afternoon. There was a circle with numbers and you put your finger in the number hole and rotated it. Because I think there was a dial inside or something. Well, to anyone growing up today, corded rotary phones seem like an unfunny prank played by a dumb uncle.
Wait a minute. Think of different. You have to pick up the phone and then do it?
But people did live like this, kids mutter in horror. And yet, at one point, almost every single house in America was tethered to the wall by a 3-foot cord at least. But one thing younger generations are missing out on is the simple joy of endlessly wrapping the twisty cord around your finger while on hours-long calls with your buddies, or taking the cord to the other room or bar down the hall to a different room, testing the cord to its limit. Cause the only thing more annoying than explaining the rotary phone to that 10-year-old is eavesdroppers. Shag carpets. Shag carpeting. An idea that seems so great at first, but obviously wasn't thought through very well. Well, for those of you living in blissful ignorance, shag carpets have extra long, extra thick with 2 C's fibers, making a pristine one super soft and the perfect place to lay down and play a board game, or traipse barefoot without a care in the world. But these big ol' fibers were virtually impossible to clean.
Look at all this shag carpet.
So over months and years of use, they attracted all sorts of grit, grime, smells, and stains, becoming overall pretty gross. And they were also a sight for sore eyes. Unless you loved them, then they were gorgeous, with most of them sporting a horrible blend of green and gold that was a blast for your feet, but also a blast to your eyes. I think it might be a blessing that shag carpets, while immensely popular in the 1960s, are virtually gone today. Central vacuum. But Nick, how did they manage to clean their ridiculous shag carpets in the 60s, you ask? Well, the answer, my friends, is of course a central vacuum system. And if you're like 85% of the population who doesn't exactly know what that is, well, think of something similar to central air. You connect a detachable hose to plugs in the walls, one in every room, and dirt would be magically whisked away to a central holding area, to be emptied whenever you remembered, which was almost never. A somewhat silly system, but the invention of PVC pipes at the beginning of the decade, and the proliferation of shag carpeting, I assume, led to the wide adoption of central vacuums during the 60s.
Sort of 60s style.
They were especially popular in Canada because, I don't know, maybe maple leaves or something. Conversation pits. I imagine the person who first invented the conversation pit looked at a traditional living room with manic eyes and slowly said to themselves, yes, just like this, but lower. Well, for the uninitiated, a conversation pit is, to quote the dictionary, an architectural feature that incorporates built-in seating into a depressed section of flooring within a larger room, often with a table or some other feature in the middle. They were the perfect spot for rounds of Pictionary, spirited debates about the Vietnam War, or this being the swingin' 60s, of course, orgies. And unlike other items on this list, conversation pits are actually very cool. So why did they disappear?
She's fell into the conversation
Well, one main culprit is probably TV, because once every house in America had one, the living room became less about conversation and more about bowing down to our chief babysitter and overlord. And TV in the round still hasn't been invented, unfortunately. Console television sets. Speaking of TVs, televisions in the 1960s weren't the flat screens of today that take up almost no room. You know, hanging on the wall or sitting on a lovely piece of furniture. Back in the day, TVs were the furniture because technology used to stink and it wasn't as advanced. Televisions used to take up a massive amount of room. The screen had to have all sorts of plugs and bells and whistles. Hey, get off my back, I'm no engineer. But that all helped it work, and so TVs were basically really big boxes. Normally incorporating a radio or 8-track player, these monstrosities became statement pieces in their own right, with each model trying to outdo the last style and function. And almost every house had a console TV.
The $3,000 stereo system and a console TV.
Seriously, by 1970, 95% of households in America had at least one. Slide projector. Did you know that before the days of Facebook, people also subjected their friends and loved ones to both their trivial daily routines and outrageous trips to exotic lands? And they did this with slide projectors, of course. Their photos would be made into slides, I assume by magic, then inserted into the machine and projected massively on a wall or screen. And with the touch of a button, the record of a person's life could be cycled through on loop. It may seem outdated now, but in the 60s, being able to make your own slideshow at home was its own kind of magic. But don't take my word for it. Go watch the season 1 finale of Mad Men and tell me you don't get goosebumps as Don Draper sells Kodiak's carousel.
This isn't a spaceship. It's a time machine.
But why exactly are they all gone today? Well, I mean, Instagram is basically a slide projector that can fit infinite pictures. Colorful appliances. We've all been to that party, you know, where everyone skips sitting in the comfy chairs in the living room. Instead, just leans against the counters in the kitchen. It's just where everyone gravitates. But before the 1960s, this wasn't the case. It took the 1960s to turn the kitchen into a place, not just to cook meals, but to entertain guests, and also to spend some time. And people obviously wanted to show off, which leads us to our next item, super colorful appliances. Wanting to impress their friends led to stoves, fridges, and dishwashers, all matching in the most outrageous colors imaginable.
What? I'm talking about the 60s, man!
Maybe aren't my choice for my kitchen today, but I do believe kitchens these days could use a little pizzazz. I'm just tired of boring stainless steel and gray. Wood-paneled walls. One decorating trend that should never, under any circumstance, come back is the choice wood-paneled walls.
Wood paneling, aged-down walls.
And I know I'm stretching the definition of an item a bit here, but they really were everywhere in the 1960s, so a PSA is necessary. I mean, who thought floor-to-ceiling wood panels were a good idea? Also in any shade of brown. Personally, I think it makes the room look dark and uninviting, like a cabin in the woods where you're definitely going to get murdered. Some 1960s houses even had them in the kitchen. What a travesty. No wonder we were all scarred. Fondue set. No 60s house would be complete without a fondue set. That magical melting pot of cheese and chocolate that brought the 1960s most delicious fad right into people's homes. Just perfect to group around in a conversation pit. We could all drip melted cheddar on the floor, and it would blend perfectly well with the shag carpet.
Everything smells like fondue.
But I think the most amazing thing about a fondue set is that you can't use any part of it for any other practical use at all. Tiny ceramic pot with space for flame underneath. Ridiculously long and skinny forks for dipping. If you ever decided that you hated liquid foods, you just had to throw the whole darn thing out. I'm sure most were used once and then gathered dust in the attic for years upon years. Wow, what a list. I think we got most things, but was there anything from your 1960s house that we forgot? You know, that all your neighbors and friends had too. How many of these did you actually have in your 1960s home? Get in the comments and tell us all things 1960s. Before you go, please hit the thumbs up icon if you enjoyed our throwback. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a trip down memory lane. And from all of us here at Do You Remember, I want to thank you very much for watching.